Okay, so I was one of those people that was stuck in the US, trying to get back to Europe in the middle of the volcanic situation. Marty couldn't get me back on time. So I had the unfortunate experience of having to spend the weekend in Napa Valley doing wine tasting and gourmet food tasting. So anyway, on to the next speaker, who is Don Tapscott. Many of you, I'm sure, will know him. He's authored or co-authored 13 books, including one which I think you've all got in your rooms. He's well known for the work that he does in looking at technology and how it impacts society and businesses. I saw him present at another Google event in May called Zeitgeist, and was really excited by the work that he was doing on collaboration, which is a big theme of today. He also gets the award, by the way, for being the person who I think, he's traveled an amazing distance, but he did it with a broken collarbone and 2 broken ribs to get here today. So please do welcome Don on stage.
Thanks very much. I'd like to say it was an accident when I was driving a Formula One car or something like that, but it was a golf cart. Me and my son went careening over a 150-foot grassy hill in the rain, spinning around, going backwards, and as the golf cart careened into the trees, we bailed at about 30 miles an hour before the golf cart was destroyed in the trees. So it was pretty terrifying at the time. I think if there had been a film, though, it would look more like a Monty Python movie. Anyway, j'aimerais faire cette présentation en français. Mais rapidement, les francophones ici me demanderaient de la donner en anglais. So I'm going to stick with English if that's okay for you. I've been working in the enterprise for the last 3 decades, and my focus, those of you who read my work, is about how information technology and the internet changes the enterprise. And what I'd like to do is convince you in the next 40 minutes that the enterprise is going through the biggest change in a century or more. A change enabled by technology in the deep structure and architecture of the firm or government, and of how we orchestrate capability in society to innovate, to create goods and services, and in the public sphere to create public value. And these views are described in my book, Macroeconomics. This book comes out in Europe on October the 7th. And somehow Google managed to get copies. So you were the first people pretty much on the planet that got copies of this book. So I'm thrilled that you were able to get that. This is my life's work. And I've been thinking about these ideas for about 3 decades. But the reason that these ideas are coming to the fore now is because this is not just the aftermath of an economic or financial meltdown or economic recession or something like that. I think we're in a turning point in history where many of the institutions that have served us well for decades or centuries are now stalled. They're in atrophy. Many of them are failing and collapsing. Contrasted by, in every one of these institutions, some sparkling new initiatives based on networks that show a whole new modus operandi for the enterprise and a whole new way of getting capability to do things. So the old industrial age corporation was typified by General Motors and the auto companies. They went bankrupt. We've got the financial system that, to me, needs a lot more than some new regulation. It needs a whole new modus operandi based on integrity and networking. Newspapers everywhere are going bankrupt, and we're all on this New York Times death watch, which is a sad thing. How much longer can it service its debt? Our systems for solving global problems cannot solve global problems. All these nation states go to Copenhagen to try and deal with this little problem we have called global warming that threatens the planet, and they can't come up with a deal. On and on it goes. The university, the smartest kids Universities in the United States don't go to lectures. The big thing is to get an A without having ever gone to a lecture. And the cream of the crop of an entire generation is boycotting the formal model of pedagogy. Now, I could go on, and I will come back and speak to some of these 16 institutions that are going through transformation right now. For each of these failing institutions that are stagnated and unable to take us forward, there are powerful new initiatives that show the contours of a new kind of enterprise, and if you aggregate them together, I think nothing less than a new kind of civilization. So that's a pretty big case to make, so let me get into it. First of all, there are 4 big drivers that are causing this change to occur. And the first, of course, is technology and the new web. Now, this ain't your daddy's internet. The old web, you accessed it through a PC, well, as Dave just talked about. We're going to access this thing through all kinds of inert objects that become smart communicating devices. I'm typically covered in these things. My door here in the hotel has a chip in it, it's internetworked. It's a new hotel door. It means the door probably has an IP address. I had a camera stolen from a hotel room in Miami, and the door knew about me. It knew who'd been in and out of the room. We found an unauthorized access. I have a friend in Toronto. Everything in his house that has electrical power has an IP address. And all these things talk to each other. I have no idea what his toaster says to his refrigerator. But he was bragging that his fence talks to his sprinkler system. And I said, well, Ken, why would you care? And he said, well, Don, if a burglar comes over the fence, the sprinkler is my first line of defense. So, this is pervasive ambient computing. Then we have broadband mobility. Remember dial-up? I think the company that's driving us faster to broadband mobility in the world is Google. Google's its initiative in the United States to endow a few communities with gigabit per second networks. You've got communities all competing with each other. Some mayors are saying they'll change the name of their town to Google if Google does this. We have the rise of geospatiality. You've seen Google goggles? Anybody? You know, you look out at the Champs-Elysees and it tells you what's going on. True multimedia. Every year, the Berlin Film Festival has this thing called the Berlinale Keynote. And I did it a couple of years ago, and I talked about the film 2.0, where the narrative of what is a movie is changing, fundamentally, where you get to be in the movie. We have the rise of web services. The old web was based on HTML, a platform for presentation. The new web is a platform for computation. The internet is becoming a giant global computer. And every time you go on that and program it, you're programming this computer. So I go into Flickr and I put a picture of my puppy. They ask me name the picture. In technical terms, they're asking for an XML tag. I type in Bernese Mountain Dog. It links me up with 934 other Bernese Mountain Dog owners, and I'm into a community finding out why my puppy eats sticks and has digestive problems and so on. So this is very different. The old web was a platform for presentation. Now we have a global computational platform that enables us to collaborate. And finally, as Dave just alluded to, the old web was separate from real IT. Many of you in this room are CIOs. And you had real IT. Then you had the web, and these two weren't really linked. The only way they came together was around the internet, or the intranet. Well, now, because we have this global computer, increasingly we can move parts of IT onto this big computer. Why would you do that? Well, it's going to be more cost-effective, and you get better integration. And most important, the world becomes your software development department. So this is a big change. It's very fundamental. Now, as a CIO, there's this little detail you have called the legacy, right? Many of you I know in this room, you have systems in your companies that are old enough to vote and drink. And so there's a real migration challenge here. How do you create the conditions whereby new investments and all these new cloud technologies contribute to a desired future, as opposed to perpetuating the past? The way I've been describing it is that God may have created the world in 6 days, but he didn't have an installed base. So, I gotta tell you, I confess, I used that joke recently. Behind the screens was a huge window where I was giving this speech. Unbeknownst to me, there was a thunderstorm shaping up. And I dutifully gave the line, God may have created the world in 6 days, but he didn't have an install base. The second I said that, a bolt of lightning cracked across the window. The whole room shook with thunder, and everyone was like, what's with that? And then, of course, they all laughed. My only regret was we didn't capture it on video. I could have put it up onto YouTube. Tapscott gets endorsement for big idea from colorful source. So that's point number one. Now, point number two is this technology revolution is intersecting with the demographic revolution. Who here has children, nephews, or nieces under the age of 32? Hands, please. Okay. So you know what I'm talking about. We have the first generation to come of age in the digital age. These kids are different. I started studying kids about 15 years ago when I noticed how my own children were effortlessly able to use all this sophisticated technology. And at first I thought my children are prodigies. They're genius. And then I noticed that all their friends were like them. So that was a bad theory. So I started working with these 300 kids. It was back in 1997 I wrote this book. And it was a best-selling book. Well, flash forward to today, these kids are not just growing up, they've grown up. They're coming into the workforce, into the marketplace, into society. And there's no more powerful force to change every institution than the first generation of digital natives. I'm a digital immigrant. I had to learn the language. Now, I call them the net generation, because this is the defining characteristic. This is the children of the baby boom, or the post-war generation. Today, they're aged about 14 to 32, inclusive. Around the world, they're the biggest generation ever, although not in Western Europe. And this is a very interesting point that we can come back to when we have a panel discussion. There'll be a huge crisis for talent in Western Europe. But time online is not taken away from hanging out with your friends, learning the piano, talking to your parents, and doing your homework. Time online for these kids growing up is taken away from watching television. The baby boomers, my generation, watch 24 hours a week of TV per kid. And these kids spend less time watching TV, and they watch it differently. They come home, they turn on their computer, and they're in 3 different windows, and they're listening to iTunes, and they're texting, and they got 3 magazines open, and a video game going. Oh yeah, and they're doing their homework. And the TV may be going on in the background, but the TV's like music. It's sort of like ambient medium. When they're online, what are they doing? Well, they're reading and organizing and authenticating and researching and composing their thoughts and having to remember things. This is creating a generation that processes information differently. And overall, it's not bad. It's something that's positive. There are some issues. Furthermore, this is the first time in human history when children are an authority about something really important. Think about that one. When I was 11, I was an authority on model trains. Today, the 11-year-old at the breakfast table is an authority on this digital revolution that's changing business, commerce, government, learning, publishing, every institution in society. In the 60s, we had a generation gap. Big differences between kids and parents over values and so on. It doesn't exist today. Kids and parents get along pretty well. What we have to look at your iPod and your kid's iPod. There's overlap, right? My parents didn't even like the Beatles, let alone the Doors. What we have today is what I call a generation lap, where kids are lapping their parents on the info track. And if you've got a teenager in your house, you know what I'm talking about. Who does the systems administration in your home? So this is creating a very interesting period in history. Now, we can talk about this later in the panel, but just one little incident. Okay, so I often interview young people in front of audiences. This was just one. It was a big crowd. There was about 7,000 people in the audience. And just give you one example. On the left there is Rahaf Harfouche. She was living in Paris. Her boyfriend's in Toronto. So these videos Skype all day long to keep their relationship going. They cook together across the Atlantic Ocean. I asked her, so Rahaf, do you use email? She said, email, no. That's really like yesterday's technology. And I said, well, if you did use email, what would you use it for? She says, email? That's sort of like a formal technology, say, for sending a thank you letter to one of your friend's parents. That would be a good use of email. I said to her, there's a book called The Dumbest Generation. It says the digital age is stupefying you. Are you ignorant? I'll bet you don't read the newspaper. You probably don't watch the TV news. You probably get your news from Jon Stewart and The Daily Show on Comedy Central. Aren't we lost because of your generation? She says, well, I don't think that's a fair characterization. Most of the people I know are well informed. She says, but you're right, Mr. Tapscott, I don't read the newspaper. But she says, putting it back to me, she says, but the newspaper, Mr. Tapscott, have you ever seen one of those things? They come out once a day. They don't have hot links, they're not multimedia, and she says, you get this weird black stuff on your fingers. She says, I'm informed by RSS feeds. I have several dozen of them. I like to triangulate the news, form my own opinion. She says, but you're also right, I don't watch the TV news. But does anybody? Sam Donaldson told me the average age of the ABC Nightly News is 64. She says, it's true, I watch The Daily Show, the comedy news with Jon Stewart, but not to get the news. I don't think The Daily Show is funny unless you know the news. So we fear what we don't understand, and that's behind a lot of the cynicism about youth today. Now you put those two together, and you get a social revolution. I could show you 50 charts, and I won't, but they all look the same. They all show the old HTML website at the bottom being eclipsed by the XML-based community. The old one thought the internet's about websites. The new one understands it's about collaboration. The old one thought that content is king. The new one created a context whereby people self-organize to create their own content. The old one was a content provider. The new one is a curator of content. So YouTube beat MTV, and Facebook beat Match.com, and Wikipedia beat Britannica, and Flickr beat Kodak Gallery. I just gave you that example. There's a new blog created every second of the day, 24 hours of the day. A lot of them are garbage, and some of them are bigger than the mainstream media. The Huffington Post. I write for the New York Times. I might get 5 reactions. The Huffington Post, my penultimate article there, I got 100 reactions within 4 hours. So this is self-organization. People can now self-organize in ways that were previously unthinkable. As an enterprise, you figure this out, has huge implications. Now, an enterprise that did figure it out a couple years ago was Barack Obama. And he used the web to harness self-organization to get a new generation to sweep him to power. And, well, excuse me, I'll tell you how I came across this. It was a few years ago, and someone sent me an email saying, Don, you know this senator from Illinois is trying to get the Democratic nomination? He thinks your book, Wikinomics, book I've written, is the key to winning the presidency and transforming America. Go to myBarackObama.com. So I went there. There's my book. We believe in the principles of dynamic partnering, transparency, self-organization, the use of the internet in every way possible. We believe in the book Wikinomics by Don Tapscott and Anthony. He says, I'm asking you to believe not just in my ability to bring about real change in Washington, I'm asking you to believe in yours. And I looked at this thing. Well, my first reaction was, I am the man. But not so fast. The next day I come there, they're highlighting a different community. It's these young firefighters for Obama community. And then the next day it's the single moms who support daycare for Obama community. We created a platform whereby 35,000 communities self-organized. That brought him to power. Now, has he been so successful in using that approach to govern? Probably not, and we'll certainly see in a month. So this leads us to the final change that I'm here to talk to you about today. An economic revolution and a change to the corporation, to the enterprise. Now, throughout the last at least 100 years, we've created wealth through this thing called the vertically integrated corporation, did everything from soup to nuts. And 70 years ago, a Nobel Prize-winning economist asked a deceptively simple question. He said, why does the firm exist? His name was Ronald Coase. He said, if the open market is the best mechanism for determining how goods and resources are allocated, why isn't everybody an independent contractor at every step along the way in production? And he said the answer is, and he won a Nobel Prize for saying this, the answer is transaction costs. And when you look at it, he was really referring to the cost of collaboration. He said the cost of search in an open market to find all the right information and people and materials to create something is totally prohibitive. He said this 70 years ago. Cost of search. So we bring this inside the boundaries of a corporation where you have things like filing cabinets, where you can find information, and org charts, where you can find people. Henry Ford, the big industrialist, understood this, and within the boundaries of the Ford Motor Company was a power plant, steel mill, shipping company, glass factory. Why? Because the costs of transactions and collaboration in an open market were greater than the cost of doing things inside the boundaries of the Ford Motor Company. Now, some of you may remember it was 20 years ago now, I wrote a book called Paradigm Shift, where I said, well, just a second, I think technology and networks are making the boundaries of the corporation more porous. And back then, I called it the extended enterprise. Then we saw the rise of the web, and vertically integrated companies began unbundling into focused companies like Cisco. This is a picture of the Cisco Business Web. Focused companies that work within networks. Cisco understood this, its competitors did not. Cisco went ahead. It had a better business architecture, a better way of orchestrating capability based on networks. And now, transaction and collaboration costs are dropping so much that peers can come together and create value. Peers within a firm cutting across the organizational silos that exist, and this conference is about that. It's about new models of work enabled by networks. But also, peers in the sense of, rather than superiors and subordinates in supply chain, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner had some problems. It was peer produced. Boeing didn't have a spec. It said to its suppliers, you're not suppliers. You're peers. We're going to co-innovate this aircraft together on a network. A new aircraft will never be built the old way. It will always, for the next 80, 100 years, according to the CEO of Boeing, aircrafts will be built this new way. And peers, this is a crazy one, outside the boundaries of traditional companies. So think about it. If you can create an encyclopedia with 1 million people, it's 10 times bigger than Britannica. It's in 190 languages, but the quality's just as good as Britannica. What else could you create? Could you create a computer operating system? Well, Linux is the dominant operating system in the world for medium and large computers. Linux has some big customers like China. Could you create a physical good, like a motorcycle? The Chinese motorcycle industry is a whole bunch of little companies. They all work together on networks. They meet in tea houses. There's no OEM. There's no Harley Davidson pulling all the strings together. It's a network. This is now 1/3 of all motorcycle production in the world. Get ready for the $1,000 car from China using the same model. So I'll just close with an example that's as far away from a website and a .com that I can think of. Mining gold. Now this guy here, his name's Rob McEwen. The reason I know this story is he's my neighbor, actually, in Toronto. He moved across the street from me. He held a cocktail party to meet the neighbors. He said, you're Don Tapscott. I read your books. I said, great. What do you do? He says, well, I used to be a banker, and now I'm a gold miner. He's a funny guy. He introduces his wife, Cheryl, to the group. He says, I'm a gold miner. This is Cheryl. She's a gold digger. Thankfully, she's a very competent person with a good sense of humor. But he tells me this amazing story that he's taken over this gold mine. His geologists can't tell him where the gold is. He doesn't know where to go into production. He gives them more money for geological data. They can't tell him where to go into production. After a few years, he's so frustrated, he's ready to shut the whole thing down, and one day he has a revelation. He wonders if they don't know where the gold is, maybe somebody else does. So he takes his geological data, it's your IP, biggest secret in the mining industry, he publishes it and holds a contest on the internet called the Gold Corp Challenge. Basically, $500,000 for anybody who can tell me do I have any gold? And if so, where is it? He gets submissions from all around the world. They use techniques that he's never heard of. And for his $500,000 in prize money, Rob finds $3.4 billion worth of gold. The market value of his company goes from $19 million to $10 billion. And I can tell you, because he's my neighbor, he's a happy camper. So what does this mean for the enterprise? Let's try and draw some big conclusions here to wrap it up. Well, I think that we need to rebuild our enterprises around a new set of principles for a new age, an age of networked intelligence. These principles are collaboration, Ronald codes. That's what the internet is. It's a platform that drops transaction and collaboration costs. Openness. I mean, transparency is a powerful new force, and it's a good force. And you might as well embrace it, because we're all going to be naked anyway. And if you're going to be naked, being fit is no longer optional. Or if you're going to be naked, you better be buff. Meaning, you better have good value, because value is evidenced like never before, but you also need to have values as part of your DNA. Otherwise, you'll be unable to build trust. Sharing intellectual property. Rob McEwen gave it away. You don't need to own all your IP. Interdependence. Surely, if this current crisis tells us anything, it's that the business can't succeed in a world that's failing. And everything is connected to everything else. And finally, integrity. We need to have the values of honesty, consideration, accountability, candor as part of our bones. And these are the preconditions for trust. What is trust in business? Trust is the expectation that the other party will be honest, will be considerate of your interests. They care about you in a negotiation, not just them. They abide by their commitments, they're accountable, and they're open. The expression, what are they hiding, shows a relationship between transparency and trust. So these are a new set of principles for rebuilding our institutions. Now let's just take a few of them here, and then I'll close up. I talked about the corporation already. How about the financial system? Well, it almost brought down the global economy and all of capitalism. Some people I was talking to in Washington said we were 2 to 3 days away from a complete collapse of the global economy. This is called an integrity violation, the start of one of those principles. You know, I'm a banker, and I'm going to lend you some money to buy a house. I know that you can't make the payments. In fact, in 4% of the cases, I know you won't even make the first payment. But I'm going to give you a line of credit to cover that off. And then I'm going to get you, the rating agents, first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lend it to you and you and you. Then I'm going to get all you guys, and I'm going to bundle these mortgages together into a collateralized debt obligation. I'm going to get you, the rating agency that I pay, to rate it AAA, and then you, the insurance company, you're going to insure this puppy. Then I'm going to sell it to you guys, investors. You don't know what you're buying because there's a lot of opacity. Everybody gets screwed. You lose your house, and you. You, the rating agency, look ridiculous, and you almost go under. The insurance company does go under, and all the investors lose their money. This is called an integrity violation. Now, and there's nothing open about this. There's nothing collaborative about this. Why couldn't we rebuild the financial services industry on a new model? Now, here's just one of the examples that you read about. Something like risk management. Why don't we take risk management and put it in the commons? Kind of like IBM took the operating system and placed it in the commons when it embraced Linux. Oh, risk management is the source of our proprietary competitive advantage. Hello, it hardly conferred an advantage on any banks and almost brought down the entire system. There are $1 trillion, plus or minus $1 trillion, of toxic assets sitting on the balance sheets of the US banks. Nobody knows what their value is. You can't mark them to market because there is no market. You can't mark them to model because no one will believe what a bank thinks they're worth. Place them in the commons and let the tens of thousands of sophisticated modelers that exist in the world, like Linux system programmers, get in there, dig deep, come up with objective measures, We clear these toxic assets off the balance sheets. The banks can start to lend money again. We start to open up and rebuild the economy. Well, that's one of a whole bunch of Wikinomics type proposals on how to change an industry that's been functioning in a certain way for a long time. What else have we got? How about the newspaper? Well, I think we're going to talk about this more in the panel, so I'm not going to get into it, but newspapers are going bankrupt. The problem that newspapers solve, the incredible costs of bringing together the news and producing it and distributing it out there to people, well, that's no longer a problem. So news is a commodity, and you don't need to buy a newspaper to find out, what's going on with this wacko guy in Texas that wants to burn the corn. You can just learn about that in lots of different ways, and there'll be accurate reports. Well, maybe there's a new model that's emerging. The Huffington Post is at least 10 times bigger than the New York Times. Now, there are some interesting issues. How do journalists get paid? How do we ensure quality? How do we ensure good investigative reporting? How do we ensure context? Will we all be balkanized into worlds where we can just live in our own little bubbles and only take in information that we tend to agree with? Will we get exposed to other points of view? These are all issues worth discussing on the panel. Nation, state, and global problem solving. Now, don't get me wrong here. The nation state's not going to go away. But the nation state is the wrong size for the global economy. So we have a big problem with climate change, right? Bill Clinton said at Davos last year, if we reduce carbon emissions by 80%, not by 6%, by 80% in the year 2050, it'll take 1,000 years for the planet to cool down. And in the meantime, bad things will happen. He estimates 1.5 billion people will lose half of their water supply in the next 10 to 20 years. Do you think Haiti was a humanitarian crisis? So all these nation states go to Copenhagen, they try and get a deal they can't. Meanwhile, I estimate there are 20 to 30 million people in multi-stakeholder networks, a new model of solving global problems. They're organizing on this thing. This is the first time in human history when the world is being mobilized and we're all on the same side. The world's been mobilized before around world wars, but we were on different sides. And these 20 to 30 million people are not just on Facebook causes kind of yakking about it. They're doing things. They're architects retrofitting old buildings, and there's school kids who are figuring out how to reduce carbon emissions in their communities and so on. And these multi-stakeholder networks, I've got actually it's a big multi-million-dollar program examining these new models of governance. It's very extraordinary. You know, the World Economic Forum, the Davos group, it sort of has a meta-network underway. It has 800 of the so-called smartest people in the world. And they're organized into 80 different councils looking at things like, what's wrong with the global legal system, with which these Harvard and Oxford professors all think is not fit for function anymore. It was designed for a previous period. I was heading up a group called the Future of Government. Our governments are inappropriate for this new global environment. It's an amazing initiative, but there are all kinds of interesting questions, as with the newspaper. How about legitimacy? This initiative is inspired, but is it legitimate? Who voted for it? Who is it accountable to? How do you get to participate in this thing? How will it influence the course of the world? How can citizens vote? Well, no. Do we need to vote on everything? There are all kinds of very important challenges, and we discuss these in the book. What else have we got here? A couple more, maybe. The university. Well, I think the universities are moving into a period of great crisis. The model of pedagogy, based on the lecture, has been around for centuries. It kind of goes like this. I'm a teacher, I have knowledge. You're a student, you're an empty vessel. You don't have knowledge, get ready. Here it comes. Your goal is to take it into active learning, active working memory, where through practice and repetition you can build deeper cognitive structures so you can recall it to me when I test you. Sort of I've stereotyped the lecture as drill and kill. or sage on the stage. The lecture is the process whereby the notes of a lecturer go to the notes of a student without going through the brains of either. Now, I appreciate the irony that I'm standing up here giving you a lecture, but this is actually not a good way of learning. Who's going to remember the 16 institutions, or the 5 principles, or the 4 drivers? You may remember a couple of things from this talk, and I'm trying to get you to change your point of view about something. And there's a role for a lecture doing that. What's wrong with this model? Well, it's one way, it's one size fits all, and the student is isolated in the learning process. That was a prof teaching statistics. There's no one size fits all for statistics. Everyone in the lecture hall is either bored or else they don't get it. We can move towards a new collaborative model that's teacher-focused, where the students get to collaborate in the learning process. This can be done K to 12, every kid in Portugal. Is anyone here from Portugal, by the way? Few. I'm supposed to be headed off there later this week. Every kid in Portugal by the end of this year will have a laptop in the school connected to a high-speed network. And it's not about technology in the school, it's about a change in the relationship between students and teachers in the learning process. Furthermore, we can change not only the model of pedagogy, but the way that content gets created. Isn't it kind of ridiculous that we have university professors all around the world, each figuring out their own way of teaching what an analysis of variance is? You know, somewhere out there in Berlin, there's a prof who's really nailed the best way to get to most students on this. Why don't we share this content? And it's a wonderful initiative from MIT to get this going. Charles Vest calls it the meta university, where universities will not disappear. There's a role for the campus. I'm not arguing for online learning. I'm talking about freeing up professors from lecturing to work with students in customized one-on-one and small group models where kids use technology to enhance that entire process. And here, we're talking about bringing together content so that it can be shared on a global basis. What else we got? Government. Well, the model of government that we have is an industrial age model. It actually grew up at the same period as the industrial age corporation. Bureaucracy 80 years ago was the big hot management term. We needed bureaucracies to avoid graft and patronage and corruption and protect the public purse. Well, just as in the private sector, vertically integrated companies are unbundling into business webs so we can create whole new models of how to build public value. So on the right there, that's called NKLA, Network Neighborhood Los Angeles, or sorry, Neighborhood Knowledge Los Angeles, where governments act as a platform. They just give away data. Rather than, we're a government, we take taxes from you, we have these people within our boundaries, we create these services, we deliver the services to you, we hope you enjoy the services. This is, no, we're a government, we have all this data, we'll provide the data as an open platform, kind of like Amazon opens up its APIs in some ways, and you self-organize on that platform. So here's some data about communities in LA, school dropouts, petty crime, deadbeat dads, housing code violations. Then someone does a mashup with Google Maps, and when a community starts to go into duress, the map changes color, and a new kind of entity, a multi-stakeholder network, intervenes into the community to fix the problem before it becomes a big problem. I was in Melbourne about a month ago talking to the CEO of Melbourne. I said to her, do you have data about bicycle accidents? And she said, yeah, I'm sure we do. I said, just publish it. Someone will do a mashup with Google Maps. You'll be saving lives within a week. Government as a platform, not just as a service provider. I don't know, what else have we got here? I think I'm going to have to end up. So I'll end up with this one because it's the theme of the conference, work. What was the old model of work? Well, it's best critiqued in the best-selling management book of all time. I did not write this book, nor did Peter Drucker. This book was written by a guy named Scott Adams. You know, the industrial age command and control corporation divides the world into the governed and the governors. At the top is the supreme governor, the bottom the permanently governed, and in between those who act as governed and governors. Your goal is to move up the chain, get more people reporting to you, it's office politics, da-da-da-da. This is an inappropriate model of work. And we need to move to something new. So what is it? Well, it's not just a document-oriented system. I don't think SharePoint's the foundation for a new model of work, because you need a system that's oriented to people, not just to documents. It's not knowledge management. Knowledge management has failed. The model was wrong. Viewed knowledge as a finite resource. Well, it's not. Knowledge is an infinite resource. It viewed knowledge as being inside your company. Well, the most important knowledge is not inside. And the way to achieve knowledge was to containerize it, so that when, you know, somebody leaves the company, we'll still have their brain or something like that. No. The most important knowledge is contained in the cranium of other people. Now, there's a lot of knowledge in computers. At the Zeitgeist, I was speaking at Google Zeitgeist in London. Eric Schmidt gave an amazing factoid. He said between the beginning of all time in 2003, there were 5 exabytes of information recorded. An exabyte is a quintillion bytes. 0 to 2003. He said, in the last 2 days, over 5 exabytes of information recorded. So there's a lot of information in containers. But the most important stuff is contained in this container, the cranium of other humans. So the foundation of these new models has to be collaboration. This is my dream suite. You can see Google Office and the Google apps touching on all of these and ultimately round it out into a full integrated user interface. It's based on people, personal profiles. You need industrial strength social networking, not Facebook, because it's not, you shouldn't be banning Facebook, but it's not an industrial strength network. Blogging, microblogging, wikis, document co-creation, idea storms, new generation project tools, project team tools, deliberation. This is a new category called collaborative decision management. I wrote a white paper, just Google it on the web, defining this new space, and Gartner is now following it. And there's some technologies emerging. New generation knowledge management, and of course you need all the IT administration and backup stuff to make all of this work. This collectively, and what you're talking about here, is a new operating system for the corporation. A new operating system for the enterprise. In my research, and I've done lots of it, it changes the metabolism of an enterprise. It enables an enterprise to get capability, to innovate better, to engage customers better, to build better value, and to compete better. So I'll just close up then by saying, I think this is a big change that's underway. And that's a good framework maybe for you in the conference. So this is not, you don't go back to 1982 to see something comparable. You have to go back a few hundred years. Back in agrarian feudal society, knowledge was concentrated in a tiny handful, in an oligopoly. And people didn't have knowledge, but when they started to have knowledge, the old institutions started to look stalled. It didn't make sense for the church to be doing medicine. It didn't make sense for a bunch of kings and nobles to be making all the decisions. We saw the rise of parliamentary democracy, the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther called the printing press God's greatest act of grace. The creation of the university, the corporation. This led eventually to the Industrial Revolution and the rise of capitalism. And it was a great, the industrial society and system, mass production of education, mass media, mass distribution, mass, so on. It was a good model, and it advanced humanity, wealth creation, and so on. We're now moving into a new period. It's a new age. Let's call it an age of networked intelligence. And the reason that we can start to talk about this now is because of this current crisis has created a burning platform, and I don't mean to be cute with a joke here, for all of us to start to think about rebuilding our institutions. Near Oxford, in the moors of Otmore, in the days of winter, at night, when the starlings have been out foraging around for food within a 20-mile radius, the starlings come together at night and they create one of the most extraordinary things in nature. It's called the murmuration. And a murmuration is a flock of thousands and thousands of starlings that move together in amazing synchronicity. Each bird acts on its understanding of the local context, but there seem to be some principles that are driving their behavior. The people who've observed the murmuration say they've never seen an accident. And these things have a purpose. In some of these shots, you can see a hawk trying to get in there and get at a starling. He's unsuccessful. They protect the birds. They warm the birds up for the cold night. And there's a social organization here where the birds are jockeying for a position. There's no one leader for a murmuration. The birds each take responsibility at some point in time and they show leadership. It's sort of like a collaborative leadership model. Is it possible that through networks of glass and air that we as humans can now network our brains together to create something qualitatively new? I don't know. I'm not proposing this. I'm asking the question. Is this a new age of networked intelligence? Could we become more conscious as a group, as an enterprise, or even as a society? And in doing so, perhaps that's the missing link in creating a learning organization. Because surely organizations that are not conscious cannot learn. Well, it's sort of an interesting thing to contemplate. There's a crisis of leadership. This is a new paradigm. When these things happen, you get conflict, confusion, vested interests fight against change, and leaders of old paradigms are often the last to embrace the new. I think we are at a turning point, and we have some big choices to make. And the choices are, think that everything's going to get back to normal. You work for a newspaper, yeah, things will get back to normal. You work for the music industry, things will get back to, the industry that brought us Elvis and the Beatles is collapsing, and you'll read in macroeconomics, the third largest source of revenue in its death agony is suing people that love its product. Or we can take a new route based on some new principles, a new model. What is the enterprise based on a new global collaborative platform that enables us to think differently about capability? There was a French pilot and philosopher named Tapscott. He says, we should welcome the future, for soon it will be the past. But we should respect the past, for it was once all that was humanly possible. I don't mean in any way to be critical of what we've done, because we did what was possible, but it's now possible to go forward. And another Frenchman, Victor Hugo, says there's nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come. You know, a lot of these ideas were ideas in waiting. The new web, new generation of digital natives for whom this is all like the air. They were waiting for social networking to become social production. And they were waiting for a convulsive shock to the system that would wake us up. So hopefully the time has come for each of you to find that leader within you to change your enterprise, and in doing so, I don't know, to change the world. One thing for sure is the next period will not be boring, so thanks very much.